a very prestigious panel this morning on the attractiveness of France for international organizations, specifically the role of Paris as a capital for sustainable development. So we have Jean-Yves Le Drian, French Minister for European and Foreign Affairs, and this is for the Paris Peace Forum. We also have leaders from 4 international organizations whose headquarters is based in Paris. Louise Moshikiwabo, the Secretary General of the International Organization for Francophone Affairs, and I'd like to thank her for being here. Jeffrey Schlaganoff, Deputy Secretary General of OECD, he's also with us, as well as Gabriela Ramos, Director General for Social and Human Science at UNESCO, and John Denton, Secretary General of the International Chamber of Commerce, who is with us online. So these 4 institutions are, of course, at the very heart of a very dense network of stakeholders, international players who are committed to international cooperation, including the French International Agency for Development that I am the head of. Now, Paris is the venue for many international meetings, Libya yesterday, and also the Forum for Gender Equality last summer, COP21 6 years ago, and the creation of the League of Nations a very long time ago. So Paris plays a very particular role in terms of international governance, but its role and its signature, its contribution, is perhaps less clear than Rome or Geneva or New York or Washington. And so I think that we are meeting here this morning just to discuss that very issue, because we all feel that this role has something to do with what has been going on since 2015 after the Paris Accord on the sustainable development for concrete multilateralism, efficient multilateralism, in the words of President Macron, and this is all about international cooperation. This is the theme of our discussion. We want to try and clarify this. Of course, let me turn first to Minister Le Drian. It's a great honor to have you here, and you are working on an ordinance currently to clarify and to strengthen the attractiveness of Paris as a hub for international organizations. Thank you. It's working. Thank you, Remy. Just a few words to tell you that the commitment of France at the side of international organizations is well known. It's very strong and determined because international organizations make up the multilateral structure that we are so attached for. This is multilateralism about efficiency, multilateralism based on proof. So working with international organizations, this is about political commitment and unfailing support for international organizations that we show on a regular basis. There's a financial commitment as well in terms of our capacity, which is regular and permanent, but it's also about commitment on a daily basis of our capital, of our regions, of our stakeholders, in order to support the work of international organizations that have chosen to be based in France. Of course, many of these are in Paris. We have Angel from the OECD, Gabriela from UNESCO, and the Organization for Francophone Affairs, but many other organizations are also based in Paris, such as the International Organization for Animal Welfare, the CERN, and the European Office of the European Development Bank. So these are regions which welcome these organizations, which host these organizations, and but we also have other areas in Lyon, for example, which is a pole for World Health. Recently, we had the decision for the World Health Organization side. You also have the CIRA, and we also have Strasbourg, which is the headquarters of the European Parliament and the European Court of Human Rights. So we also have other cities which will take in the other international organizations like OIV. So this just goes to show our concrete commitment to international organizations and a support on a daily basis for multilateralism. So we want to continue in that vein. This represents about 60 different international organizations in our regions, most of them in Paris, but not only in Paris, but in the future. We would like to strengthen this commitment and make sure that France, and Paris in particular, becomes a real hub for international cooperation and sustainable development. So this is a logical extension of everything I've just said, but also a prolongation of the International Forum. This fourth year, we have shown that Paris can move these international commitments forward, and with all those people who want to promote the common good of humanity. As Remy said, when the Parliament was discussing the law on inclusive development, we set up a mechanism for simplifying tax matters, administration matters, and so that international organizations can benefit from, to make sure that the attractiveness of our country, our capital, for all these international players is stronger, more stimulating. And this is an invitation which I would like to throw out so that this message be heard and so that Paris becomes a true hub for international cooperation and development. So this is the message I have to convey to you today. And I know that this point of view is shared, but it needs to be translated into actions. And I hope that in the coming months and years that will happen. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Minister, for that wonderful outlook and the confirmation of the very strong commitment of France for multilateralism all across France, but in particular in Paris. Now I'm going to turn to our panelists. I'm going to start with you, Louise Mushikiwabo. Thank you. I think you are very far from us, but you should be connected now in order to participate. So my question is very simple. It's the question that I will ask all of you. What does it mean for you, personally speaking, and for the organization that you are the head of, to live and work in Paris? So the International Organization for Francophone Affairs is about respecting diversity, and this is a key component, which is the very heart of the objectives for sustainable development and long-term objectives. So Louise Mushikiwabo, what inspiration do you find in Paris for your mission? Thank you very much. Thank you, Remy, and thank you to Jean-Yves for having those very nice words. Well, Francophonie is synonymous with diversity. We are an organization of 88 states, and we have very widespread, but sustainable development goes hand in hand with this idea of interconnectedness. So it is, when I think of Paris and France, I think of them as a country where we can create those networks that Jean-Yves Le Drian referred to. We've created a network of international players, and we have drawn other international players as well, so that we can devise solutions for sustainable development. Now, for me, personally speaking, my professional life has been mainly in Anglo-Saxon environments, but in Paris I have found a lot of openness, a very open-mindedness. It's that Paris is at the crossroads, which allows us to really gather together those opportunities that come from all over, and with our members, the members of the Francophone affairs from insular states, medium-sized countries, stakeholders from public spheres, writers, cultural stakeholders. I find that our mission for the International Organization of Francophone Affairs, of course, it's about defending the French language, but Paris as a city and the combination of the two things provides a very wonderful opportunity to work together and to concentrate on those issues. So I also find that Paris already has its own signature. So it's the city of love. It's a city of an enjoyable lifestyle, and it's also the city of enlightenment. So it has a very strong reputation. So everything that concerns sustainable development, whether this is about research, whether this is about health or climate, we are now able to use this network and all that synergies to give a particular identity, an international identity, to the city of Paris. Thank you, dear Louise, for those words. Paris as the crossroads, Paris as a city of openness, and this unique ecosystem of institutions.
For OECD, so OECD, of course, has a very special role in international governance. We all know what you are doing for sustainable finance, especially taxation, budget, climate finance, ODA. And we also know that you are a key standard setter internationally, and now more and more also taking position on the trajectories of the country for sustainable development that was clearly said last week in Glasgow by Matthias Cormann. And so, well, what does it, and you're a newcomer, if I'm right, Jeffrey, in Paris.
Oui.
So what does it mean for you and for your organization?
2 ans à Paris.
2 ans.
Monsieur le ministre, Monsieur...
Minister, Director General, I'd like to thank you on behalf of the OECD for the invitation. As you know, recent exchanges that you have had with Mr. Matthias Cormann, our Secretary General, and also our recent meeting of the Council of Ministers. So this puts our organization at the very heart of development, and this is a shared priority.
certainly reminded us all that no country can face these kind of threats alone. And obviously the OECD, which was born out of the ruins of World War II, a descendant of the Marshall Plan, has been working to promote global economic development and improve the well-being of people for 60 years. We go back and always say, let's remember that the D in OECD, or OECD, is for development. In promoting development among both our member countries and non-member countries has been a priority for the OECD over its 60-year histories. Now, recently at our Ministerial Council meeting, our membership committed to working to attain the UN Sustainable Development Goals. In our new vision statement, we laid this out. We want to be able to leverage our membership, our evidence-based approach to policymaking, and our convening power to support and advance the universal UN SDGs. This is a collective effort. We're contributing our multidisciplinary competence, our experience in setting global standards, and our track record of providing internationally comparable statistics, measurement frameworks, and evidence-based analysis. I'd say here, at the OECD, we're not looking to win the Oscar for the best actor. What we're doing, as our former Secretary General often noted, is the OECD looks to win the best supporting actor. What role can we play in bringing our expertise and things forward? One particular area of our focus has been promoting sustainable and solidarity-based investments. The OECD works across its substantive committees to align finance with the SDGs, developing indices, data and policy guidance, and private guidance to strengthen quality, impact, and fair distribution of public and private finance within OECD and beyond in support of our sustainable development objectives. A couple of concrete examples in this area. The Development Assistance Committee a few weeks ago issued a statement committing to align all ODA, which totaled $161 billion in 2020, with the goals of the Paris Agreement. The Investment Committee is developing new recommendation on FDI qualities to harness FDI for sustainable and inclusive economic growth, with the aim of adopting it at next year's Ministerial Council meeting. The OECD's work on ESG investing, led by the Financial Markets Committee, is also working to develop definitions, principles, and due diligence guidance for sustainable and climate-related finance. We're also in the midst of updating key OECD standards to ensure that they remain fit for purpose and impactful in our collective efforts under the 2030 Agenda. These include a stocktaking of the OECD's Global Standard for Responsible Business Conduct, the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises, as well as a revision of the G20 OECD Principles of Corporate Governance. Tackling global challenges effectively and efficiently requires collective responsibility and strong, globally coordinated action among countries and organizations. To close, for instance, under the leadership of France in the G7, we developed a common framework for SDG-aligned finance together with the UN Development Program. We're grateful to the leadership of France on this agenda, and we look forward to continue collaborating with France as well as with our members and partners to work together to define solid, multilaterally coordinated pathways to realize the goals of the Paris Agreement and the SDGs. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And well done to the OECD for this very important contribution, which has been going on for so long. And thank you to the others of you in the room from the OECD. Now I'm going to turn to another multilateral organization from the United Nations, so UNESCO, which has a very particular role to play in order to carry out the mandate for education, culture, so many things that are absolutely key and which are included in the agenda for sustainable development goals. Those are not just financial objectives concerning infrastructure but which require sustainable science, which is very important in order to help those objectives to be realized. Gabriela, we're going to listen to a video first and foremost from Audrey Azoulay, who is Director General of the UNESCO, before we hand over to you. Good morning, everybody. Now, 75 years ago, UNESCO linked its destiny to Paris, which became its headquarters. This made Paris one of the capitals of the United Nations. And I'd like to say how much we appreciate this. And I'd like to thank Minister Le Drian, who has always been committed to multilateralism. And now, over the recent days, the international community is meeting for the General Conference in Paris for UNESCO, and this is held every 2 years, and it brings together the 193 members of the UNESCO. So we are meeting around common goods, talking about education, science, culture, but also communication and information as well. Now, the important decisions will be taken on an operational level, but also in terms of standards. At this very time, we are deciding our budget, which is going up, our midterm strategy, and also major instruments like the first recommendation on ITCs. So these are the discussions which prevent me from being with you this morning. So now, in terms of the SDGs, the role of UNESCO is crucial. I'm thinking about the objective to provide quality education for all, for which UNESCO is one of the leading organizations in the United Nations. For example, we have been in charge of thinking about reorganizing the architecture of education to rethink education for the future. And in this respect, we have also organized a meeting a couple of days ago, which was co-chaired by France, the global meeting on education, to give the new impetus to investment in education. And this is one of the major lessons from the pandemic. Multilateralism is alive in Paris through these major meetings, but also in terms of the daily life that takes place between these meetings, daily exchanges between the numerous organizations based in Paris. I'd like to greet our Paris neighbors with whom we have very strong links, like the OECD, which celebrated its 60th anniversary last year. So we have just presented to the 26th joint initiative on education and the climate, and the OIF as well, the International Organization for Francophone Affairs, with whom we have also worked closely in partnership with the French government in order to create a digital platform for educational resources. This is called Imagine École. This was launched last December, and this is for the whole of the international community, for Francophone pupils from Western Africa, Central Africa, and this is also inspiring Anglophone Africa, but also we have cultural diversity and other meetings. So we talk about the operational issues on the ground as well as standards. I'm referring in particular to the joint work that was carried out at the beginning of 2000 on cultural diversity, especially the Convention for Cultural Diversity for 2005. So it's working with the AFD that we managed to make these educational resources available, both material resources and also digital resources. So there's just a few examples, but this diversity of multilateralism based in France and in Paris is very precious, because the crisis that we have just been through shows just how much the solutions need to be joint solutions. And this is the very essence of the discussions that we are holding here in Paris. This multilateralism is not against any states, not against any organizations. It is distinguished by its openness to civil society. And this is one of the characteristics of UNESCO, because since its outset, UNESCO was characterized by contributions from scientists, by researchers, artists, archaeologists, museums, contributions from the education community, journalists, also professional organizations, and of course NGOs. And we continue to work on this identity, opening up to new stakeholders, with our more than 200 partners, and this is part of the Global Coalition for Education, so that we can continue to provide education to children. So I think it's this multilateralism which is required by the international community. It needs to be concrete, efficient, pragmatic, which must know how to dialogue, meet together, and work as a network. This is what we would like to see at UNESCO, but also with you and with the help of France, to make Paris one of the crucial venues of this international cooperation, and particularly in terms of the mandate of UNESCO. So I wish you fruitful discussions.
Merci beaucoup à Audrey.
Thank you very much to Audrey Azoulay. I think that she has raised a very important idea, and that is the fact that multilateralism is polylateralism. It means that we are looking for all of these stakeholders and looking to orient them in the right direction. Gabriella, 75 years in Paris. What's your assessment and what are the prospects? Good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here with you. Honoured, Mr. Minister, to share this stage with you and with you all. For me, I've worked for 20 years at the OECD, and now I'm at UNESCO. And for me, Paris is a city of results. We worked towards the Paris Accord, and that's not minor. That's a significant contribution that France has made to the world. We also have the taxation that was done in Paris as well. Thank you, Jeff, from the OECD. Also, we have significantly contributed to COP26, and I think that we must highlight the results that Paris delivers in terms of multilateralism. Now, at UNESCO, we're also working towards a significant achievement because we have an agreement between 193 countries for an ethical narrative as it relates to artificial intelligence.
I could not believe when I saw the content of the recommendations on the ethics of artificial intelligence when I arrived at UNESCO, that it would be approved by everybody. By, of course, the European countries that played a very strong role, and France in particular, but also by Asia, Africa, Latin America. And what we're saying there is that we need to regulate better the technologies to ensure that they deliver for people and they deliver what they need to deliver in terms of the magnificent contributions they do, even to find a vaccine or even to help us wave the pandemics. But we need to control the downsides in terms of biases, in terms of unfair outcomes, in terms of discrimination. But we went a step forward with the recommendation that is going to be approved on Tuesday, and so I ask for your support again, is that we also put policy chapters in terms of ethics of AI and education, ethics of AI and communication, ethics of AI and environment, because we seem to forget that the technologies have their own footprint. And therefore, we need to ensure that we control the negative impact on the environment, but that we also channel more resources for the technologies to help us manage better the food system, manage better disease, manage better all the things that we need to manage. But also a gender chapter, because these technologies are not really inclusive, and we need to make them inclusive. This is going to be a major breakthrough, and I know that this is going to be one of the additional elements that will signal Paris as a place of results. What else do we do at UNESCO? Madame Azoulay had mentioned that, but don't forget that we are also the place that manage the reserves of the biosphere. And now we have agreed at the COP26 to expand these protected areas, that is amazing, by 30% more. And we are also the place that protect culture. And we have been protecting artists and all the cultural actors that have been so hardly hit by the crisis. So I would say that UNESCO is also very Parisian in a way, because we are the intellect arm of United Nations, but we're also about culture, we're also about science. Another outcome will be the open science. We know that open science was key for the solution of the crisis that we're facing, and we're also going to have this as a very important outcome going forward. Very pleased, Minister, to hear that you're going to adopt this law. I think Paris is fantastic at delivering, but is not as attractive as it should in terms of the treatment of the institutions. UNESCO is even not competing with the other institutions of the UN system, so we need to review that, because you want to attract the best and the brightest, as we always do in the OECD. We're very able to do that, but we really need to put the international institutions in Paris on par as we have it in many other places. So this is what I have to say.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Gabriela. An intellectual capital of thought, a place of results. I like this idea. Thank you very much for that. And now I would like to give the floor to our fourth panelist, John Denton, who is the Secretary General of the International Chamber of Commerce.
An Australian in Paris. Dear John, we all know, well, maybe we don't know, all of us, how important ICC is, the extraordinary, fantastic, capillary network you are heading in each and every country in the world on the business side. Also the fact that you are so big in arbitrage and you have a key role for the business climate and its respect worldwide. And I know personally, and your organization is also turning very ambitiously towards SDGs and climate. So the same question for you, John. What does it mean to live in Paris, and what is the perspective from ICC?
Oh, thank you very much, Remy. It's great to be with you. I'm sorry I can't be there personally, but I had to give a speech here in Barcelona. Minister, it's great to actually listen to your words in introduction. When you describe the new framework you're developing for international organizations, that's actually very attractive to us. I must say we're an association at the moment under French law, but when I describe a little bit what we do, I think what you've described there for international organizations will probably fit very comfortably for us. Now, as Remy says, often people talk about Paris as an intellectual capital, but they don't often talk about Paris as a business capital. The fact of the matter is the ICC is the institutional voice of business. We have more than 50 million businesses that are part of the ICC. And in fact, Louis, it's great to hear you speak as well. More than 2/3 of our constituency are now in developing and emerging economies, and have just doubled down in Francophone Africa with our representation there. So it's very exciting for me to be able to speak with you today. Our purpose is to enable business worldwide to secure peace, prosperity and opportunity for all, which is why sitting and talking in the Paris Peace Forum is actually very attractive and very comfortable for us. We see as an institutional voice driven by that purpose, that everything we do is geared towards ensuring that business actually has an opportunity. But people are often very surprised that the world's largest business organization is actually centered and established in Paris. We were established not in the ashes of the Second World War, but in the ashes of the First World War. We were actually established as the mirror to the League of Nations from the private sector's point of view. And the idea was the private sector would stand up and act and cooperate when governments couldn't, and that's what we've done. And so we've built our network to enable that across the globe. What we also do, which people don't often understand, is we create standards, and this is actually very relevant to the SDGs. We actually curate most of the regulations that support the flows of trade finance, for example, across the globe. That's $10 trillion. And we've actually, at COP26 last week, I launched a very specific but very important initiative to bring the whole of the trade finance ecosystem into climate-aligned activity, which means we're pushing another key part of global finance in support of action on climate, and that's $10 trillion. But just individually, even on things like letters of credit, we actually control and curate those rules, and that actually is about $1 trillion as well. So we're very focused on enabling business, and not just through policy, but through standards, but also through direct institutions and direct interventions and instruments that we create as well. And by the way, we've just created a whole movement called the ICC Centres of Entrepreneurship out of Paris, which I've just launched 4 in Francophone Africa. I've also launched 4 in Latin America. I've launched 2 in the Middle East, and I'm just starting to launch in Asia. The first will be in Indonesia, in Jakarta, to support Indonesia's G20 year. And these are actually ideas and concepts which actually come out of Paris when we think about the role of enterprise in order to ensure the development. And one of the things I like about working with you, Remy, and this is a proposition that we're working on at the moment, is how do we as the private sector support the French initiative in order to re-establish and improve the condition of working people and citizens in Lebanon. So we created an ICC Centre of Entrepreneurship in Beirut at the request of civil society and the business community because of who we are. And what we can actually bring into the French development plans and the broader economic strategy you have to support Lebanon is actually on the ground real-time business experience and our capillaries in the Lebanese society. And we're doing the same thing with Kamala Harris's project of a partnership for Central America, where we bring in the ICCs in Guatemala, our linkages in Honduras, etc., to support on-the-ground activity there. So it's really important for us to actually be in Paris. But what's more important and what's missing, though, I think, is linkages with some of these other organizations, but also, I think, from time to time, ensuring that when we talk about multilateralism, we're really talking about multi-stakeholder. One thing that disturbed me most, I read the recent report by the Secretary General of the UN on multilateralism. And I think the Secretary General accurately describes the problem in terms of the need for multilateralism to be reconceived, to be effective in the 21st century. But he actually only made passing regard to the role of the private sector. The fact is, how can you imagine an effective multilateral system in the 21st century without the active engagement of the private sector? And of course, the only organization that can really do that is the ICC, because of our not-for-profit, for-purpose position. And the fact of the matter is, we are based in Paris. And we think that's an important contribution, an important issue. COP26 would not have moved as it did to establish almost the new normal, which is actually the higher aspiration, without the role of the private sector. There is no doubt that the 26th COP was much more successful as a consequence of the push. And of course, the ICC brings in, that's one of our roles, as we bring in to that multi-stakeholder debate, the private sector, and the high level of ambition we announced there has actually been very influential. And we're doing the same thing now with our courts of arbitration. And many of you would know that the ICC courts of arbitration are the premium and the #1 courts of arbitration in the global world. The fact is, that is a very important contribution to Paris as a business hub, but also created a huge opportunity in terms of professional services and for the whole ecosystem that supports that in the legal community. It gives Paris relevant in terms of dispute settlement, and we are actually doing commencing a major investment pathway in those courts of arbitration, because we're determined to ensure that Paris stays #1 in terms of arbitration. You cannot enable business worldwide without an effective dispute resolution, and we at the ICC provide that. And by the way, it's great to see a colleague from the OECD. I'm sorry my fellow Australian, Matthias, can't be with us. But one thing we're also doing is we're actually working to strengthen our relationship with the OECD. One of the things I liked most about the working with you guys was using the inclusive framework. And we were able to support the OECD on the tax debate because we're able to crowd in the inclusive private sector globally. We are actually the world's largest second-track diplomatic network, and that's something else which is based in Paris, and that we would like to actually discuss further with the French government and other friends on this panel about how we can use that effectively to support UNESCO, to support the Organisation of Francophone, to actually even further support what we do with the OECD, and of course, Remy, to support the AFD. Nothing we'd like more than to work more closely with you.
Thanks a lot, John, and fascinating to see the richness and the diversity of the contributions of your respective organizations, and also the existing connections that are already in place, and your willingness and perspective to bring them at another stage. I now turn to the Q&A session. We have received 2 questions, mainly, that I want to ask you and give you the floor, each of you, maybe to answer both. The first one is about the pandemic. I mean, what was the biggest challenge your organizations here in Paris faced during the pandemic, and do you see this crisis as an accelerator for international cooperation or not? So a question about the context, I would say. Our discussion is taking place. That's the first one. And the second question, maybe more practical, is what initiative we could take, what type of player that is not present yet in Paris could we invite? I mean, what would be your main proposal to bring our collective ecosystem, multi-stakeholder, as John was saying, at another level, to make it even better than what we are doing today in support of sustainable development and concrete, effective multilateralism? So two points. I mean, the situation you're in and what it unlock in terms of further cooperation. So maybe I keep the same order and ask Louise to start.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Rémi. The biggest challenge during this time, this pandemic that we are still experiencing for our organization, to our surprise, we were able to adapt very swiftly at the outset of the crisis, at a time when the entire world shut down, with all of the different measures that were taken. From the beginning of 2020, we were able to very quickly roll out a network of young creators in the digital field, in French-speaking countries. With UNESCO and other organizations, we have been able to make resources available in French. We were able to adapt. We created a fund to support women living in situations of insecurity. I would say that the biggest challenge for us was really the divide that exists in our states. And this is a situation not just between French speakers, it's global. The access to digital tools is lacking, the lack of access to internet. And also communication between families that are separated. And absolutely in terms of health. So I think that the biggest challenge, based on the experience that we had, was really this digital exclusion of a sizable part of the French-speaking population. I will now move on to the second question. I'm thinking out loud now, but with you, Rémi, in particular, and other colleagues, including John Denton, we had a few discussions last year about this initiative. I'm increasingly convinced that Paris, well, Paris is already a laboratory of ideas. It is a source of many ideas, but I really envisage an initiative that has Paris be a toolbox for SDGs. The city where one goes to understand how one can arrive at the various aspects of the SDGs. I think the President, Macron, has really provided many tools during this crisis, whether it relates to vaccine equity or the advocacy that was required at the level of the G7 and the G20, whether it relates to the alleviation of debt of other countries in economic difficulty. And therefore, I think that Paris really should be the go-to city where one goes to implement the various elements of the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you very much, Madam Secretary General.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that the COVID crisis, from an OECD perspective, it really made us, like a lot of organizations, question and revisit our raison d'etre, if you will, and also the way we work. I think it unfortunately pointed out that what we oftentimes thought of as very small gaps, people marginal but still within, just how deep those gulfs were. And I think in terms of looking for building back better and having an inclusive recovery throughout the world, that challenge is great, and I think it really comes through in the SDGs. As was mentioned, you know, you can give everybody an iPhone around the entire world so they can communicate, But if they don't have broadband, or they don't even have electricity, that does them very little good. So we need to really work very collectively on standards and way of ensuring that we're very inclusive in how we proceed. I think the OECD, our view of what we can do here in Paris is, look to the vision statement that our members adopted at the council meeting, in which it was very much based upon the notion of our basic standards, our belief in a rules-based international order, our belief that we share values of individual liberty, the values of democracy, the rule of law, and the need to protect human rights. I think at the end of the day, our members think that's what it all comes down to. And certainly France and Paris, if you look at the history culturally, politically, otherwise, is the perfect place to do this. It's a great place to gather and have face-to-face conversations with people, or even when we're forced to virtual forums. So a great place to do it, and the OECD is totally committed to helping accomplish that.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. We have very little time remaining. Gabriela, can you perhaps answer those two questions, and then John can conclude?
The COVID crisis, with its massive impact and how much it really shakes in many ways in terms of how we work, was an opportunity. It was an opportunity to really come very strong in defense of education, very strong with our coalition. We are very worried about the hundreds of millions of kids that are not coming back to school, and we need to make up for that. And the Coalition for Education that Stefania Giannini launched was amazing in that respect. We also are the house of the ethics of science, and we came together with all of our experts to call for vaccine to be considered a global public good. The vaccine hoarding and the lack of solidarity that we still face, I mean, the G20 made a great contribution, but the fact is that we are still in a world where half of the world is very well vaccinated and the rest are not even reaching 10% of it. It was very challenging also because I had to support the negotiations of the ethics of artificial intelligence. And John, the very first institution that we went from the private sector was you. We did a presentation. We got a lot of comments from you, and we benefited from you being in Paris. But the fact is that it was also an opportunity because we could see how much members, thinking about the massive gathering of data that COVID brought in terms of controlling the pandemic, how much we really need to get these rules right in terms of the governance of data, in terms of the governance of algorithms, in terms of the ethical impact assessment that we presented in the Paris Peace Forum. And by the way, Paris Peace Forum is fantastic. I think we should consider the Paris Peace Forum also a fantastic venue in which we can make things happen. And at the end, what was very interesting is that negotiating online, which seems to be a very difficult kind of task, helped us because it brought everybody together. Everybody knew that it was important that we get this thing. We also enhanced our contribution on the fights against racism and discrimination. We are now facing this backlash against Asians in many places, against Muslim, against Jewish. I mean, it's very important that we upheld our beliefs and that we deliver for that. And I have to tell you that the COVID really gave us a very strong push to deliver on the issues that UNESCO stands for. We are an inclusive institution, 193 countries, and I think that's very important to keep talking, to keep engaged. I don't think that divisions or self-declare issues are going to help us a lot. What do I feel we need to strengthen up? These connections, super important. Connecting each other, Remy, and you are a champion on that. We need to, we work with the OECD, we work with the La Francophonie, we work with the ICC. We need to have a place, a yearly place where we can meet. You remember that the President of France called on international institutions here to talk together. Yep. Madame Merkel, a champion, 8 years calling international institutions to come together and for a free flow of ideas. And then my final point, people-centered solutions. People-centered solutions. I'm very worried about youth. We're very worried about how youth is going to fare or not with this pandemic in terms of jobs perspective, education perspectives, mental health, trust in institutions. At UNESCO, we're launching the youth as researchers because we want them to provide us with the elements. So I think that we need to just keep at taking advantage of the crisis to scale up our action.
Last, John, your view on this? Shortly?
Thanks very much, Remy. Thanks very much, Remy, and thanks also for the shout-out for the role we played in helping evolve your discussions on artificial intelligence. We actually believe in a human-centric artificial intelligence. On COVID, the fundamental that we saw straight off, and putting aside the practicalities, was that the COVID crisis was not being dealt with in the appropriate framework. It was seen originally in terms of responses by policymakers as akin to the financial crisis. We saw straight away, because of the deep kind of linkages we have globally, the impact it was having on the real economy. You were seeing the impact of COVID in countries where the disease or the virus had not actually affected, because you saw real economies actually being affected because value chains were collapsing. You saw that in Bangladesh, for example. And so our first aim was to redirect the global policymakers to what was the real issue, which was the collapse of the real economy. And so we fought very hard to shift the way the Bretton Woods institutions, but in particular the IMF and the World Bank and a number of the multilateral development banks were grappling with this issue. And then on a local basis, we needed to get support to SMEs. So we launched straight away a Save Our SME campaign globally to bring that about. The next issue we saw was the collapse of mobility. I heard people talk before about some of the consequences of that in another panel that was on. We saw originally that if you wanted to actually get the economy moving again, you also had to get mobility happening. So we actually started working on standards to shift the global policy framework to enable safe mobility. And it actually is great because we worked with the Spanish to bring that into the OECD discussions as well. And now that you see things like the Pass Sanitaire, the Green Pass, etc., that all comes out of the hard work that we did on shifting the policy settings starting from March last year. And the last area, which is becoming absolutely critical, if you want to get the real economy growing again, you've got to end the pandemic, which is why I agreed to be the private sector representative on the COVAX Council, because my view is, and I think Louise would agree, unless we get equitable distribution of vaccines globally, then we will never end this pandemic in the way in which it will be effective for all people. It is an outrage that the level of vaccination available in the developing world, in particular in Africa, is still so low. And we at the ICC have been determined to that. We have crowded in more than $1 billion worth of funding to support COVAX, and yet governments still are not getting their act together to fully fund that. If you want to grow the economy, you've got to actually end the pandemic. You've got to end the pandemic by ensuring that the vaccines are equitably distributed, and that is not happening, and we are working very hard to do that. So there are three major contributions out of COVAX. On the practical side, I genuinely believe that what Maria said was actually critical. There needs to be a place in Paris where we do convene or we do discuss, because there is no doubt that a lot of the instruments, a lot of the opportunities that the UN agencies and other agencies develop lack distribution, lack impact, because they don't know how to engage with the private sector. We're here to help. We've done that in Geneva. We've done that in New York. We're doing that in where the UN and other agencies are centered regionally, with the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, etc. Why don't we do that in Paris as well? So, Remy, why don't I convene the first of these discussions, an avenue to President Wilson at the headquarters of ICC, a place where peace has always been talked about.
Thanks a lot, John, and thanks to you all. Je ne vais pas.
I'm not going to conclude this discussion, but perhaps I can just summarize it in a few words. First of all, I think those who have listened to us understand the incredible richness and diversity of all of the stakeholders that come together here in Paris. The United Nations and other international organizations, the private sector, many French stakeholders as well. And so perhaps this richness and this diversity explains the best signature for cooperation and contribution, more active contribution to global governance. I heard from what you said a lot of coherence and great willingness to cooperate. And I think this is something that's been underway since 2015. In particular due to the Paris Climate Accord and the SDGs. Therefore, it seems that it's less about sectors or sectoral priorities, but rather a change of method, a new method of cooperation between us all, which is being rolled out. And so I really like the proposal that Louise made and that you discussed, and that is to say to imagine Paris as a laboratory, if you will, a place where we have sufficient quantities,
Une attention au numérique aussi.
sustainable science, sustainable finance, innovation, and I think that this brings us together. UNESCO and the OECD have always been great incubators where international initiatives are born and continue to be born. You mentioned a number of them today. So now I think we need to find the venue to ensure that we can continue to build this collective that we all hope to see. I'll conclude by saying that we mentioned the 60th anniversary of the OECD. Happy anniversary. UNESCO has just celebrated 75 years, and the 80 years of the French Development Agency that we'll be celebrating on the 2nd of December. I hope that you will be here, and this will be a new opportunity to continue our discussion today. So, thank you very much to all of you. I think we are on the right path, and thanks to the Paris Peace Forum for giving us the opportunity to have this exchange, and thanks to the Minister as well for his support, which will help to make Paris even more attractive so that we can continue to welcome new initiatives and new colleagues who are willing to join this initiative. Thank you very much to you all, and see you soon.